So yeah, so these are, some more loose ones. A lot of, so these are all like examples of this for all these raindrops in the last couple of years or whatever. And then some of them I like to use to cut apart to demonstrate some of the new filters. All right, so I think I have an excess of camo green. You never know what the kids want, and it's kind of like everybody wants green, so I got a bunch of green, and then they don't use it. So it's a lot. That's the trickiest part, is keeping all the colors and stuff. So as we, talk about this, obviously, and then these are kind of some of the things that you can touch on as well when you talk about the science and all those sort of things. When these are carded, it's not just, the sheep's hair is not this long, right? There's no way. So you are trying to find these individual fiber lengths is what you want to use to felt with. So if I try to pull this apart like this, I can't do it. So you need to pull it, and you can pull it apart if you go a little further and you can get, some smaller pieces. So, but what you want when you're felting, you don't want to use these big chunks. You want it to be as thin and wispy as possible. So you're trying to pull out, just grabbing the very ends of this, and I like to use this hand-shaped, works pretty well, and just grabbing the tips of that, and then you get, that's more like the real fiber length. It's probably even a little less. So that's what we're doing, is one fiber length of each thing. And like I said, the thinner and wispier your stuff is when you start out, the better it's going to be. So, a lot of times you'll get a lot of pieces like this. Well, that one's even okay. But you'll get a lot of, kids doing chunks like that, and sort of you really want to break those up because they're not going to want to felt together very well. And even like this one I just did, I'll probably pull apart a little bit, just because I want our demonstration to be so successful. So and if it seems like it's too big, you can pull it in half, and then if it's a more manageable piece, just sort of pull it apart, you can. So I like to do it a little bit, just kind of almost as wide as my fingers on my hand. And so I'm laying out my shingles, just overlapping a little bit, and kind of also trying to fill in a little bit of spots where maybe it's a little thin. So I'm just going to lay out kind of a little square here. You can go almost as big as whatever surface you do. It's just going to take more material and more time. So, so then just like my shingles, the next layer is going to kind of lay on top. So, this is still kind of layer important. So again, this does not seem that exciting, but it's more fun than actually. So, I'm gonna start. I'll just go fairly small with this. So that's first layer. It's okay if you see the bubble wrap and then the edges. It's really hard to get if you wanted a really defined edge. You can see all these are kind of loosey goosey. Some are a little more square than others, but you can always make it larger and then trim it down so it's nice and pretty and square. There's no rules that say you have to keep the whole piece as is. I'm just going to put a couple more here on this edge to try to define that edge a little more. And then I think that's a pretty good first layer. So you can turn it or not. You can turn your hands or turn it. But this also helps you kind of be able to get a little more of a defined edge as well. Once you start layering it up, you start to see that edge forming. And as you felt it, you can kind of push in the little wispy pieces and get everything to kind of go together. So I'm just doing my shingles in this direction now. And so like I said, you could just, and I've seen some kids in workshops do this, and they've had success with it. They're trying to do a space background or something like that. It's good to, have a mix of a few different colors, or we've done some cool landscapes, where we've kind of had, green meeting blue and stuff like that. It's important to, I think about too, there were some students last year where the pieces weren't touching when they were doing different colors together. So, keep in mind you want everything to overlap. So if I wanted the bottom half of this to be brown or something, I would want that, it can stop on the top layer where it is, but it just needs to make sure that like there's enough underneath where it's sort of touching. And even like, I would probably lay the green all the way down and then add my brown or something like that soon in the third layer. So there's 2 layers looking good. So, these are, they're not, they're just not chunky. They're not like super tiny pieces, but they're, like a little see. And yeah, that kind of technique helps a lot. But yeah, and I'm just really grabbing the tips. Like if I go to grab a bunch, that's going to be super tricky. So, but if you do that, you can just like pull it apart, and then it gets a little better. So, and then like if you see too that like, the kids have like tons of chunks, you can kind of help them, pull it apart, whatever, so it doesn't. You can solve it before it gets wet. The thing is, once you get it wet, you're not really changing it. So. So that's kind of my background. It feels pretty good, I can't really see much of the bubble wrap underneath it. That's kind of important, like I don't want any real holes in there. You can kind of, tighten your edges up a little bit before you go. And then let's just make, I don't know, what should we make? Something. Just make a little something or other. Maybe we'll make like a monster eyeball or something. But so you can use this, and obviously you're not going to draw super tightly, with these wispy pieces, but you want everything you put down to be pretty thin and wispy. With the exception of if you did use that yarn, and I don't have any wool yarn in the kit, but you could kind of lay that yarn out, and it might move around, but it will be more of a definite line if you wanted to do something like that. And I think too, I've experimented with other materials as well, like I had a bunch of netting that I got from estate sales that like we would do on, the thing with the hats with the netting or whatever. I had a bunch of that material, and that made for some really cool inclusions and that stuff. So if there's anything that's like really, I've also used like plastic netting from groceries, from like a bag of onions or something, and the wool kind of felt in and around that, so that might be something that might be fun to experiment with if you really got into it, to try to see like, what materials will the wool stick to and go around and that kind of thing as well. Another thing I wanted to mention too when I was thinking about, because I really enjoyed the presentation, and just think about it that way. And when I was thinking about that, also one of the things that I did when I first started to learn this process was the different wool from the different sheeps will felt differently. And so, mostly with these workshops, we're using the same type of materials, but in some cases, if you have access to different types of wool, you can do a little test in your hand. And this is what I would start a lot of times out with anyway, showing the kids, like, this is how this process works. Like, if you really just, like, layer these wispy things in your hand and get a little water in it, it can agitate like a tiny little sample for you right in the hand. And then you can see how it could vary from the different types of wool, or, that might be a way to do like a quick experiment. If they're not doing the whole project as an experiment, they could try to felt a little piece in their hand. So. Yeah. So, yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, that too.
When you added that top layer, you added it in the same direction.
Kind of. I wasn't paying too much attention here. I was kind of just trying to get my shape. I think as long as it's, these are sort of mixed up and angled enough that I'll think they'll be right. I don't think it would hurt if it was necessarily going in the same direction, but it's more important that they're just thin enough where all those little pieces can get to each other. And I would say alternate whenever you can, but if it doesn't make sense for your design and you need to go that way, it's not gonna not work, basically. Mostly when it's not gonna work is when you have big chunks. So, all right, so that's basically where we're at with this guy. He's ready to get wet. And that's for later. And so there's a couple different ways we do it. I like to use these plastic bags a whole lot. They're nice agitation tools. They're, always around. It's very handy. And so I just got a little tiny squirt in here. I feel like I'm kind of the little soap goes a long way, but you also want to be able to see it bubble up and make sure you have And this is a good technique for making sure you don't get water all over the classroom as well, is doing a little bit of this where you're dripping it out. Because you want the piece to be thoroughly wet, but you don't want it to just squirt water everywhere. So it's a fine line. And you can also use the other, your other, whatever that would be, your piece or your resistor, whatever. I have the bubbles out on this, probably just because it's the big bubble wrap. If it were the small, I think it would matter a little less. I just felt like it might be easier to put the bubbles out on the big side, but eventually.
Both sides, the bubbles are out.
Yeah, I think, you know, it would work either way, but just getting started, I thought that maybe the flatter surface might be a little better, but it wouldn't be the end of the world if it wasn't. Let me just see, kind of get this together, and really kind of gently from the beginning, just so it's kind of starts to mat down, because I might even want to get that plastic back on, but this feels pretty good. See, I'm squirting a little water out, but I'm good, and you can see. So I'm good and wet. You know, it's kind of, it's not really starting to stick together yet. It's gonna, if I were to try to pull it, I could pull these stringy pieces off and mess up the whole thing. So I'm just gonna let it go a little more, kind of get it going. What's nice about using the 2 layers of plastic and everything else is it really does afford you to be able to move it a little bit, and it kind of gives you a nice, you know, way to handle it without messing it all up. Also, you could do it this way, with just the plastic. And I usually cut these bags in half when I'm using them with students or workshop for those. Yeah, well, just, you know, but yeah. So, but you could also do this. And then with this is kind of nice because you can feel it a little more. The 2 layers is also kind of nice because the one plastic can kind of slide on top of the other plastic. So your piece is kind of held in place, but it's still getting agitated.
Is anybody timing this?
Oh, yeah.
I was 43 when she started, and then 52 when she started.
All right, let's write it up here.
Yeah, there you go.
43 to 52 was the, just the creation, so, and it's 152, so.
Oh, yeah, it's not yet true.
So there's this, so you can see like these edges are all fuzzy, you know, and if you know, want to tighten it up, you can kind of just tuck them in a little, you know. I mean, eventually, like, if we kept going with a lot of this, there might be some pieces that want to like walk off that don't really attach, you know, around the edges, and so it's kind of nice to maybe just check on it, you know, especially at the beginning, and to make sure everything's still kind of staying where you want it to stay, because it's really kind of a limited window that you have for it to not go anywhere, you know. And if there was a piece of this that was like sticking way out here or something, and I wanted to pick it up and get rid of it, I could do that at this point. But you can see it's still not like, you know, when these hairs are coming off, like it's not going yet. So.
That one was not one.
It is not. Yeah, I ran it for a minute and it didn't work. So we'll just work with it. So, but I feel like, you know, at that point, like after doing those edges and stuff, I felt like it's starting to come together a little bit, so I can be a little more aggressive with it. Let's just bring in that material. And then eventually I'm going to put this other piece of bubble wrap back on top of it. But I do kind of like the way it looks with this plastic. And then, you know, with this you can start to get a little more. And so really your, you know, your kind of materials, your plastic is sort of helping keep it together, but you still want to kind of check on it every once in a while, make sure you're not like doing anything major. The clear is kind of nice because you can see what you're doing.
And last year, Jesse, you used something like this. It's like one of those other.
Yeah, I like those too.
So this is another.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are kind of, those are nice here. Let me just use that actually. These are nice because, you know, they sort of hold in place, and the texture on that will also help it to felt, you know, so like those work too. I've got the bubbles in right now, which is probably fine also. So it's kind of just, you know, whatever. These are kind of nice because you can almost like push it down into that, and then it really isn't going anywhere, but it's kind of agitating. walls, yeah, it's kind of nice because it sticks, you know. So with the bubble wrap, let's see, eventually, now I've got the bubbles up, so that'll help kind of hold it a little more too. So, you know, it's kind of either way. I just like, the most important thing is to start out gently, so you don't just like tear into it and scatter everything everywhere, you know. And then you want to do both sides a little bit too.
What happens if there's too much or too little soap?
If there's too much soap, you'll get bubbles everywhere. If there's too little, it might take you a little long. I mean, it's, you know, I am such a non-measuring person, like when you're talking about the teaspoons of soap and all that, it even stresses me out thinking about that. But,
It's hard, I mean, it's hard, it really is that way.
well, and, yeah, and like when I cook, that's how I, yeah.
And Gina and I were talking about that, because I had a similar reaction to Jesse, and we thought, you know, that would probably lead into some really interesting discussion on what are those overlaps in science and art, and you know, we experiment and you observe and trying to take away and figure out what works, but then there are those places where things are different between the arts and sciences, and a lot of it in the arts is sort of that just natural feel, which you would never get with.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yep. Gotta make it work sometimes in art.
Well,
So, yeah.
I was gonna say, also just kind of when talking to kids, if like your soap is more acidic, you can dissolve your wool and you don't have wool.
Yeah, you may use it, so, this is, yeah, a little bit of, and you can use hand soap maybe too. So this, I could see just by it shrinking up, that I know that it's starting to become solid, nice solid piece, and I feel a little more comfortable handling it now. You know, it's kind of coming together, it just looks good, I don't really see too many holes or anything. Good thing to do to like see if it's fell together is do a little tent test. So just trying to pinch the smallest little piece you can and see sort of what comes up. And last time we did it, there was a bunch of fibers that sort of came up. This is doing really good, it's kind of like making a little tent. So it's pretty close, and I think it's probably ready to move on to the old hand agitation, which I'm going to squeeze a little excess out. And this is the fun part, especially for kids. Just abuse it.
But they don't have to throw it against the table.
No.
Those of us who want to avoid.
They do not. Yeah, but like I said, they love that. As long as they're not throwing it at each other, that's probably okay. But you know, and you can do this different ways. Like if you know, and if you're like, maybe you got a little squeezed a little too much out, but I just want it to be dripping, you could use your plastic, you know, and they've got bigger pieces, like I mentioned, I've rolled it up before, and you can do that with your small pieces too. But what's important when you do this rolling is you want to kind of switch directions a couple times, so you're not like, oh, this is like a nice, good way to get it going a lot, you know, and it'll go really fast. But if I keep going in this direction, it'll end up kind of skinnier. So if I want to stay sort of square, I want to roll it up in this direction, just to kind of help it keep its shape. But like I said, this is a process where the results are hard to calculate completely from the beginning. But this is pretty much together. It's not, you know, that's what we've got. So I'm going to rinse it out, get the little excess soda out, and then I'm going to talk about the needle felting. So that's kind of your rinse it in like clean water, does it really need to be? You could, I mean, you know, if you're not wearing it, it's not like it matters if there's a little soap left in it. You know, you just, I mean, especially if it's like really soapy, you probably wouldn't want to do that in a bucket because you're just making a bucket of soapy water, but you can do that.
Don't have running water.
Exactly. Yeah, you can make it work. Yeah. And again, or you know, you could just not rinse them unless they're super soapy. You know, in that case, if you don't have that, I would say like go easy on the soap.
Now, if you were to want to make a shape, like let's say, could I, in theory, like take this and turn this over, and at what point would you shape felt around something?
So for something like that, and I've made specifically like bottle koozies and
Yeah, like
things like that.
if I just wanted
Yeah.
to like make a bowl.
Well, the problem is it's going to shrink, right? So even if you put the material right on there and you agitate it, it's going to want to shrink smaller than what this is. So the tricky part is kind of estimating your sizes and things like that. The way that I've done holders and covers for stuff like that is almost I'm trying to find something that sort of shapes but like a resist, so imagine this is cardboard, and it's sort of shaped like this, right, where it's got a rounded top and a flat-ish bottom. And I would use this as a piece of cardboard, or like in the slideshow where you had a piece of fabric in the middle, something like that. You could use a piece of plastic, you could use a piece of foam, like whatever, but something that's shaped like that, and then you would felt on both sides of it, and then basically it would all end up felting together, probably even at your opening, like your flat part would be your opening, and the rounded part would be the bottom.
Would you lay out your layers, put your something in between it, and lay up 3 more layers?
Yes.
Like that?
Yes, and then as you're doing it, you would have that thing curved around the edge, you know, like the 2 layers would need to meet on the edge, and so you would brush your layers on the first layer in, and then get your layers going on the other side, and then you could basically, like, you have to agitate that edge too, so they stick together, and then you would end up with, if it, you know, it probably all felt together and your thing's just inside of it, so you have to cut it and pull the insert out, and then you have like a pouch, and then that pouch can be formed around these sorts of things.
While it's still wet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you'd agitate a little bit, you know, it might be really big when you start, because you want to start bigger than your object, you know, so, and then it would basically, you know, you just keep shrinking it down and down until eventually it's really tight around there, and that's when you like really stretch it, pull it with either real hot water or microwave a piece so that you can really stretch it and get it on there, and then let it dry on there. It would be the, yeah.
So,
I've made dry
what
orders
if
and stuff.
you were doing that, like where you're at right now, and it's time to leave, because I'm quite done with it.
You can, the beauty of
Just
this
get it
thing,
wet all over again, and you stop.
you can stop at any time, and we've done this a lot with the workshops with Diane, where it's nice, you know, if each kid has their own setup like this, even if they get this there and they're not even ready to get it wet, they've got it all laid out, class is over, just leave it, you know, if they've just gotten it wet, close it up and leave it. As long as it's not, I mean, and I would say leave it wet, don't, you know, during the agitation process, I wouldn't squeeze it all out.
But you could
I would
put
leave
it
it.
in a tub or something.
Yeah,
Or
put them
stand them in there.
just
put
don't leave
it on
them long enough that they'll get
The
molded.
thing.
Yeah. You know, that's-
They're the hands off.
But they'll be fine, especially, yeah, if they're in a place where it can circulate and they dry out, you can just get them out again.
Oh, okay.
And work on it, because, you know, imagine some of these really elaborate projects, right, you know, it's for
Right.
like, you know, you may not be able to do it all in one sitting. And it's fine, it's perfectly easy to get it back wet. And like, say, if I wanted to use those loosey-goosey ones, if I wanted to felt those some more, I can still get those wet and agitate those.
And you have to see more to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
So I think there was a real,
yeah.
like, piece to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's great about this process, because it is, you know, it's forgiving, like in that way where, you know, you can kind of come back and you can, you know, sort of say, oh, what do I do next? You can also just use it. So this is, so, you know, I've got this piece, and, you know, I'm pretty happy with it, but I want to do a little more with the needle felting. Or say I had a hole in it, right, and I really wanted, I was like, it was breaking my heart that, like, it was ruined, you know, and it's got this big hole in it. So if it were a hole, like in the green background or something like that, right, there's, you know, you can kind of get it going and do a little hole patching with your needle felt. And so the needle these are needles that are made for felting. They're different sizes, because they're short and long ones. I usually just buy a ton of them because they're fairly cheap and they are very easy to break. And so, but they basically, this needle, it's real sharp here, so it's definitely like finger stabbing time if you're not careful. And then, but what these needles have that you can't really see is they have burrs on them, similar to the fur, you know, when we're looking at the fibers and the, you know, all that, they have these little burrs, and so that they're designed to help pull those fibers back and forth. And so, I've been saving all my little foamy things. Yeah, you know, I was in somebody's classroom doing this, and they had these, and I was like, oh, these will work great. And so I started saving them, because it's like, oh, we never have it, or usually, you know, at the museum, when I was working at the museum, I could bring foam, you know, we'd have foam laying around, and I'd bring some foam in the classroom or whatever, but it's kind of nice when you can use these. And again, they're not as durable, but for, you know, doing this in a classroom workshop, it's actually pretty perfect. So yeah, if I wanted, say I had a home here, and I wanted to use, you know, again, you still want to start with like your little wispy layers and building stuff up. And, you know, if it were a real big hole, I would maybe want to use a few more layers. But basically what these needles do is they start to poke it through. And I guess too, what I would want to do is make sure I don't poke too much through onto my blue part. Because as you poke through, that green would show up. So, you know, I would maybe, if I had this hole in it and I didn't want to mess up my design, I'd be working from but it will also disappear a little more if you work from the back. But you basically just use this needle to kind of,
And this process, you can do totally dry?
it's better if it's totally dry, actually. It works a little better. Because see, I mean, just with this wet felt, it just doesn't always want to do what you want it to do when the wispy stuff is wet. But you can do it. It doesn't have to be totally dry, obviously. Careful too about the fingers. There's a couple little like holders and stuff I have where it's like some little teeth that go. But generally, as long as you don't put your fingers right in the mix, you can do pretty well. So this will kind of attach that to that, and that's kind of a way to fix a hole. Now it's not totally, maybe it's not as easy as I just described it. It takes a little bit, but you can see like, you know, that they come through on the other side, and then you can just kind of agitate them into submission. And you know, some of it's a little loose here. You know, you might need to really, you know, spend a lot of time with that needle. It's not
You
as
can do it back, back to the other side.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you can work on it from both sides. This is just kind of where it's loose and where I can see that it's loose, so I want to work on it from this side. Yeah, that'll start to go.
Do the same thing, we're gonna detail too.
Exactly. And another way that you can add detail, or what you might want to do, if you say, you know, that wispy stuff's hard to control, right? So, if you've got, you know, you could make scraps of other stuff, you could make yourself some material that you could use. I'm just gonna go full on with this monster eyeball. And, you know, cut yourself a shape out of that, or even pre-made felt, as long as it's not synthetic or whatever. You know, you could get felt from the craft store and cut yourself. And they actually make, what do they call it? I think it's called like pre-felt. I've seen that in some of the craft stores where it's more like this, it's like lightly felted, as opposed to, you know, like the standard stuff you're used to buying that's super hardcore. But even when you look at that stuff now, and if you've seen these, now that you've seen these needles, you'll see that those like hard felt have all those needles holes in them. When you look at it up close, like it's like, oh yeah, that's like, I'm sure it's a machine that just needs falling out. Yeah. So yeah. So if I want to attach this shape here, I can just cut it out and start poking it through. And it won't take much for it to adhere pretty lightly. It will take a lot if you want it to like completely ingrain into your piece. So I kind of say split the difference. You know, like give it enough so that you can kind of, you know, that it will attach, but again, if you're not wearing it or not flying it as a flag in front of your house or something like that, then it's not going to go anywhere.
So you really don't have to add any water to that at all.
Yeah, it could be totally dry. Ideally, it's
It's
totally dry.
completely done, dry.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, ideally, it's totally dry. Like I probably did this one as an example, you know, with it just being as dry as it was. Yeah. And so, you know, you'll get all these, and eventually, you know, you'll want to see enough of that purple coming through the other side where it's like, okay, I know it's really attached. But, you know, like, it's like a So, yeah. So that's basically, that's the technique, or the techniques. And, you know, and I mean, and again, you can go kind of crazy with this and do whatever. And if you had that yarn, you could also needle felt that yarn back into it. You know, some things will stick, some things won't. It's better when you're going with organic fibers. I've bought some stuff a while back from a local person who, she mostly is like she dyes yarn and sells yarn and something, but she was doing some wool for a while. And she had a lot of different materials, and she actually had, it's made out of bamboo. And it's like, it's supposed to be wool, but it's bamboo. It doesn't felt together as easily as this, but that bamboo material would needle felt to this, because it's kind of that similar makeup and similar dye. So there's lots of other things that might want to stick to it, you know, but if you wanted to experiment with it. So yeah, but that's basically the technique. So, questions?
So my husband has all kinds of old little suits.
Yeah.
He's getting ready to donate to the Goodwill or throw away or whatever.
Yeah.
I can cut those up in squares and they can cut stuff out and felt it in there too.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or tie, well, silk ties, but sometimes it would silk do it.
Probably not as easily. I mean, you know,
But,
yeah.
yeah.
And maybe, you know, there's like, yeah, but like, you know, and the yarn's really nice. I've done some fun things with the yarn because it's nice to like draw it, kind of, you know. So, you know, these work well. I mean, obviously you don't want to, if I clobbered it through the table, I would have broken one, but it's kind of nice having the small ones because it's not really going to reach the shoe really way through. So.
So you want to go to Goodwill and get a bunch of old wool sweaters?
Right.
Oh, just patterns and things.
Yeah, grab some $2.
Felt them in hot water.
The garage sales.
You know, take a sweater
Yeah.
and felt it first, just in the washing machine in hot water. And then you've got this that
Yeah.
you cut out of that ring.
Totally. Yeah, or you could leave it, even if you didn't do it first, and it had more of the open weave, you could use those, you could pull the rings out of it, strings out of it, you know, like there's, you could, yeah, I mean, I'm all about using like cheap and recyclable.
Yeah, recyclable materials.
Yeah, exactly, like, let's use it. So, absolutely.
Okay, so you have a class of, let's say, 20. How much materials do you need?
That is an excellent question. So they sell wool by the ounce, and I was just kind of doing, let me try to reach back in my math brain, I was just doing some calculations about, how much we would need if you had a class plan. I would think you would probably want at least like, I mean, what are those, like little ounce make, they're not even.
I got this from Amazon, and I can look it up and figure out how much it was. This is maybe half of what was in there, or 2/3 of what was in there. My guess is for a small square, it might be for like a class of 20. It goes a long way.
I would think it's, I mean, if you do it sold by the ounce, and I would think like 2 to 4 ounces per student is probably enough. You know, but you know, if you're wanting the varieties of colors and stuff like that, you know, I would err on a little more. You can buy this locally, and I think maybe it's in some of the materials somewhere, but it's Notorious, is the knitting shop in the city, and they, yeah, I don't know if they sell wool, they do.
Well, what about, otherwise you're right up here.
I've never been there.
Yeah, you know, I noticed it.
Yeah, unique department in there, I know the rest of it.
Yeah, I wonder if they sell wool, right? Yeah. But I know, but I
I know, it's been a while since I've been in there.
Yeah, I buy it at Notorious, by my house, and they have, I mean, they have a lot of section stuff, and they have, it's nice because they've really upped their colors, like, all that stuff came from them. So
How
they
much
have
is
a-
A big one,
I'm
yeah.
trying to remember, you know, it's in the, I mean, it's really, it's like all sold by the ounce, and I've only bought this in like mass quantities lately, so it's hard to remember exactly what. I feel like when I was looking it up, and I was thinking, I mean, it would probably be, it was maybe like $16 for, like, I want to say for like a 4 ounce, maybe more. I'm really bad at remembering, so I looked at so much of it lately that it's hard to remember what was what. So I don't want to misspeak, but, and you know, you can get it online too, of course, but, yeah, they, you know, like, I think even every color they have is a different price or something. Yeah.
We experimented, it was like 6 kids that did it.
Okay.
I think that would be enough for a class of these graduates.
For one class?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 22
each of
students?
these- I mean, each of these, it's a little bigger than it looks in these little bags. You know, they cram it in there, but I mean, it ends up being, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I mean, that might be an ounce. So, and that's, I mean, and that's roughly what I think to make it back.
So this could be.
I mean, it's close, I would say.
Close to it.
Yeah, pretty close.
So this had 50 colors, and so per kid, if they were doing something, I think 2 of those would be enough.
Probably,
Like,
yeah.
I think for a class of 20, this fits more.
Yeah, I mean, I would say maybe, you know, no extra, would probably be good to have, you know, you could probably, yeah.
Wait, they're from Amazon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I have it on my list.
But she would, Carrie was saying that kids
And look at this felt.
Yes, little.
Yeah, it's real big.
Old